From the Sunshine State, this is Tampa Bay's 10 Talk.
It's time for FLA Law, brought to you by the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. This hour will be informative, along with taking your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
That's right. This is FLA Law, live on the radio. As you know, this is your live legal call-in talk show coming to you, brought to you by the hosts and the injury attorneys at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. As you know, we come to you every Tuesday live at 5 o'clock to answer your legal questions live on the air. So thank you for joining us. Hopefully you're a faithful listener. But if you're new to the show, call your mom, your dad, your family and friends. Let them know that FLA Law is live on the radio. If you have any legal questions, now's a great time to call in. My name is Jacqueline Bryan. I'm one of the injury attorneys at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. Tonight I have my co-host with me, my partner, Brian Caulfield, who's a board-certified civil trial lawyer, who he and I will be discussing some personal injury topics and some popular lawsuits that are in the news currently over the past 2 months or so that hopefully maybe you've heard about, and you can engage with us or give us a call if you have any comments or questions about it. But of course, we're also here to answer your questions live on the air. And so because of that, I want to make sure I give you all the information on how to call in and to reach us this evening. The best way, of course, is going to be by phone. We'd love to hear from you and answer your questions live. So the number is 727-441-3000. Again, the call-in number to have your questions answered live over the air is 727-441-3000. Now, if for some reason you're not able to call in, but you do have a question and you'd like to do that virtually, we are streaming live right now on Facebook and YouTube. And so that's a good way to get your questions in as well. If you want to drop it in the comment section of either of those live streams, you can do that right now as well. All you have to do is search our firm name, which is, again, is Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. Perenich is spelled P-E-R-E-N-I-C-H. If you type that in, you should see our firm page come up. Usually there's like a red circle around it showing that we are live. Click on that. You'll see the live feed. You'll see Brian and I in the studio. And you just type your questions down there in the comments, and I will read those out for you over the air. And Brian and I will kind of tackle whatever that question or comment might be. With that being said, Brian, would you like to introduce yourself and say hello?
Well, thanks for having me, Jacqueline. Great to be here. The law office is open for the next 1 hour.
Absolutely.
So folks can reach us for free, and we're happy to talk to you about any wide-ranging area of the law. As Jacqueline talked about, our firm celebrating its 70th anniversary of practicing personal injury law. And I've actually been there about half that time, about 36, 37 years or so.
Yeah. So
any questions that you have about auto accidents, about slip and fall, about medical malpractice, really anything about, personal injury or wrongful death type cases, the law office is open right now, and you can get right through and give us a call free of charge and get your question hopefully expertly answered. We've been doing this for an awful long time, so hopefully that'll be the case. But let us know that you're out there and pick up the phone and give us a call.
More expertly by Brian, I will say, probably. But it's actually a great point that Brian just mentioned, because I do want to open the show. I said I'm going to try to do that every time for the next couple months, is to start out discussing our 70th anniversary. It's a pretty big deal. And with that, I'd like to kind of give a highlight to the firm. As Brian mentioned, the firm was founded in 1955, and this is our 70th year in business, serving clients that have been hurt and injured due to no fault of their own. And the firm just has a great reputation, amazing legacy, and that's why I started working here about 13 years ago, just celebrated my anniversary. Last week, actually. And so I want to always start out the show whenever I'm co-hosting with my partner and colleague, just to see if you are willing to share, just something that comes to mind, a fond memory, a funny story, or just a war story that, like you said, you've been here quite some time now, something that comes to mind in celebration of our 70th anniversary.
One of the fond memories I have, and we still do it to this day, we have, a Christmas party at the end of every year. And I think about the first ones that I went to when we had the senior partner, Guy Perenich still alive. Really they were very much kind of family type events. And so it was great, and you think back of some of the times that we've done that at places, different places. We would go sometimes to Safety Harbor Spa. Sometimes we'd go to one of the lawyers' homes. But, I have some, very interesting memories, including one time when Guy almost burned my house down with someone had a candle lit and he was holding the present too close to an open candle. And next thing you know, he's holding on to a pretty large box that's going up into flames. And so
oh my gosh,
that was one funny thing I can remember. It wasn't funny at the time because it was my house. But in any event, we've certainly had a lot of good times at Christmas parties over the years. And certainly I could sit here and tell war stories like crazy for hours and hours. But certainly we'd probably rather answer people's questions than let them know that we're here and we're here to answer their questions. And if they call in right now, they can get right through.
Absolutely. The lines are open. Again, that number is 727-441-3000. And of course, if you have a question or comment or story, if you've been a client in the past and like to just share your thoughts, again, we're streaming live on Facebook and YouTube right now. Love to hear from you. With that being said, tonight is going to be a show where we kind of go over some lawsuits that have been in the news and different things that are probably playing out. You might have seen them on the news or read about them in the paper. If people get the paper anymore, and or they come up on your news feed on your phone. So hopefully these will be stories that you've heard about. But if not, maybe you'll learn something new. One of them we actually touched on about a week or two ago when our other board-certified trial lawyer was here with us, Lori Robinson. And now there's been a new lawsuit filed. So I thought it'd be good to kind of get Brian's thoughts on this. And so if you were listening a few weeks ago, then you know that there's a law firm up in Orlando that had filed a lawsuit on behalf of a news reporter in Orlando who was making a claim or bringing a lawsuit against Spectrum News, which I assume is his employer, but that part I don't entirely know because there's some work comp issues that I wasn't clear about. But apparently the family had filed a lawsuit accusing his employer of negligence and raising questions about the responsibility of news organizations to protect the journalists, and saying that essentially he had gone out into the field where a murder suspect was still at large, and they had not yet found this guy. And the news anchor sitting in the car with another person in the crew, and the murderer does come out and approaches them in the van and shoots both of them. And unfortunately, the news anchor does die. The law firm, if I remember correctly, I don't have that particular article in front of me, but they were essentially arguing that there's greater protections that companies should do. And in this particular instance, I guess, because they're in that kind of a field, they can provide better security measures, or even, I think they even mentioned bulletproof vests or things of that nature that aren't very costly and expensive. And they could do something that as simple as that, I guess, could have prevented something like this. And so not quite sure how that's going to play out, but that was recently filed about a couple weeks ago. But now one of the other victims, who sadly was a 9-year-old girl, who that same person, after, I may have the sequence background, I don't know if it was after or before, but after shooting the newscaster, then I guess runs into a home and bombards the home and kills the two people inside the home, the mother and the 9-year-old girl. Now the same law firm has filed a lawsuit on behalf of the 9-year-old girl, stating that the Orange County Sheriff Department did not respond in a timely manner. So there's not a lot of details, but what I do know is that it's against the Orange County Sheriff's Office, and that essentially they're claiming that there's a marked contrast and a marked difference in the way that this case was handled in this particular neighborhood, which is Pine Hills in Orlando, which is predominantly a neighborhood of color, versus other areas. So that seems to kind of be the angle that they're approaching this at. the response speed is kind of the whole issue there. So what do you think about that lawsuit?
Well, I think they have two uphill lawsuits. I never say never,
Sure.
but certainly in my mind, the first part of the kind of question you posed having to do with the news anchor is going to be, I think, extremely difficult because they have changed the law in such a negative way now that essentially, the whole concept behind workers' compensation was that if you are injured or killed on the job, that you don't have to prove fault, and your employer is automatically liable to pay you the enumerated workers' compensation benefits.
Right.
And so the trade-off under the law is, in exchange for that right, you don't get to sue them for negligence.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing you see is what they're trying to do is they're doing exactly that. They're going to try to sue the employer and accuse the employer of negligence. And there were some exceptions years ago. I'm old enough to know those exceptions. If you could prove there was a substantial certainty of injury or death, and that was kind of created by the employer, then there were ways that you could kind of actually get around the work comp immunity. But that law has changed, and it's made it even worse. It's essentially you have to prove almost like a manslaughter standard now that your employer
virtually certain
virtual certainty that you were going to be injured or killed. And I think that's going to be very difficult. Certainly, they're going to have to try some novel theories. There's a novel theory known as a dual capacity doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
That is that the employer was actually operating in a dual capacity. That's going to be very, very tough because,
that's what I thought too.
You've got basically a news gathering outfit here, and you go where the news is.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, one of the kind of hallmarks of the new part of the law says you have to not really know or appreciate the danger. And it has to be like concealed from you. And it's pretty hard to argue that when you came out, knowing that there was a murder suspect that had not yet been apprehended, and you're going to the scene of the crime, then certainly it's kind of foreseeable that person could still be in the area. So I think that's going to be an incredibly difficult case. But I never say never.
Right.
It just depends, on all the evidence. But I don't think that one will succeed. The other one probably have a better chance if you can.
The young 9-year-old girl.
The young 9-year-old girl, you've got a sovereign immunity issue. What duty, if any, do they owe to her? But I think, once they go ahead and agree that they're going to respond, I think you're going to have to do it on a timely basis. And so I think that one, obviously it has its other issues. It says the child died.
The neighborhood has any factor in the speed? Like they're saying that it's a bad neighborhood, or it's a neighborhood of predominantly community of color. Do you think that matters?
I think, I do think that matters. I do think that ultimately is, if they can show that, then, that's going to be creating a foreseeable zone of risk where you responded slower than you could. The problem, however, is they're going to argue, hey, look, we don't have any duty to respond in any certain time. So I think that one's not as tough as the first one, but it'll be interesting to see how they play out. That's for sure.
Right. And I noticed that it appears that they both were filed because the statutes were getting ready to run on those, the 2-year SOL. So I'm sure they had to get those into suit, and we'll see what exactly happens. So we'll be following those for our listeners. If anyone's interested, I'll try to keep track of these stories and see how they play out, if there's any news to update on those. But of course, the lines are open. If you have any questions regards to your own legal matters, we are still available to answer those as we go through some of these topics involving other people in their legal situations. We still want to hear from you. And again, that number is 727-441-30 The next case I had, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about these, but maybe not knowing that they have now resulted in some lawsuits, is the big Boar's Head recall. I think it was towards the end of last year, we started to see or hear a lot about that. I'm not sure if you had of the recall of the deli meat and the different items from Boar's Head and Publix because of listeria and the listeria outbreak that had occurred. So that I knew about, but I had not been aware yet of any lawsuits. So apparently there has been, and it looks like the first of its kind involving the Boar's Head ham was filed by the family of a gentleman out of Sarasota for wrongful death. The family of Otis Adams died of complications, it says, from listeriosis, meningitis, and sepsis. And he filed, or his family filed a lawsuit for wrongful death against Boar's Head and Publix supermarkets. The lawsuit claims that Boar's Head's ham and their cheese that he purchased at one of their Brooksville Publix location did contain listeria, which led to his death. As many may know, and about mid-year last year, Boar's Head did recall Liverwurst and 9 other products because of the listeria outbreak at one of their production centers in Maryland. Since then, they did expand the recall to more than 40 other products, and they have permanently shut down the Maryland-based production center. So this lawsuit was one of the first that was naming some other product meat other than liverwurst. What do you think about that? That's a very...
Sounds like a winner to me.
Yeah, very particular issue with listeria there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the public needs to be protected from such things, and the law is going to do its part to try to help protect. From what I understand, if this is what I heard about, they think it had something to do with the actual sealing of the packages, that they were improperly sealed, and as a result of that, you get this type of bacteria. And so it sounds like that case clearly is going to be a good case in terms of your chance of success. You obviously have to prove the cause of death, that is, that it in fact came from this particular food. But it sounds to me like, they know that to be the case, based on all the other things going on. What's really interesting to me now is when you listen to what's going on, where federal employees are, being kind of summarily fired, you wonder what's going to be happening at the Department of Agriculture. You've got federal inspectors that are making the rounds and visiting these places. What's going to happen? Does anyone think this is going to get better by getting rid of those people? So it'll be very interesting to see what happens in our government and how it affects safety, not just for food products, but how it affects safety for even aviation, which of course has been in the news so often lately. It's
quite scary, the number of recalls that are out there right now as far as food goes. It's pretty alarming. But to go back to the point that you just made as far as the causation and proving that the listeria came from the product, how, if you can, walk us through how do you address that issue, and how does the family in this case prove that he purchased the product? I'm sure maybe they have a receipt, and then that the product had the listeria, and the listeria came from that particular item. Yeah, that really sometimes can be helped by the government and can be helped by the defendant's own testing. Obviously, as this kind of has been investigated, they've gone back and they've been able to figure out which lot numbers. Yeah. And so hopefully they still have the package, and that lot number, for example, matched what the manufacturer already knows has been infected with listeria, and boom, you've got your causation. If that's not the case, it's much more difficult. You might have to get your own laboratory analysis, and then, utilizing, science, show that the type and strain of listeria that's, existent in this product is in fact what the plaintiff had. So that becomes far more difficult. But generally the way these cases line up is you've got the government out there doing a lot of testing, as well as, the company itself. And they're actually providing you a great deal of information that you need to meet your burden of proof. Right. I'm always fearful, though, when it seems as though the evidence you need is in the hands of your opponent,
Yeah,
the party that you're suing. So,
yeah. No, I mean, look, I got a case right now that I'm wondering. It's like, unfortunately, my client has since passed away, and he's not here to talk about his own accident.
Yeah.
And
Just
it
like
was
this
kind of a
gentleman
premises
in
liability
Wisteria.
at a big store chain, and he was injured just outside, and magically they don't have a video of that particular area.
Of course.
And so yeah, you
But
do.
when the video's not so great, they always have that one.
Right. Yeah. So that does, and that's how sometimes our system can break down. But again, that's why you kind of have to do your work up front.
Yeah.
Right. You're sending investigators out to this place to see if indeed they do have a camera that would be pointing in that general direction. And then you've got to do the hard work, the discovery that goes through. Okay, where are all the cameras located? Who's the company that services them? How often do you look at these? Where are they stored? What's the protocol for that? So, but I can tell you, I mean, it's here to stay.
Yeah.
And it's so very important. I've had so many cases that, but for the existence of security video, and some not even on the property, I've had motorcycle accidents. Who was at fault solved by a U-Haul business that was 500 yards down the road.
Yeah.
That had, a security camera for their own business.
Serendipity.
That just should. Yeah. I mean, then I've had another case where an elderly couple both killed in a car accident. I had the security video from the entrance to their own trailer park that they were pulling into at the time of their death. And it broke the case wide open for me in favor of my clients in both cases. And frankly, but for that, would have lost because I had, of course, the people that you're suing are the people who are the only ones there to tell you how the accident happened in the absence of any independent witnesses. And, they told a big fib, as we might nicely say. So
it's a nice way to put it.
Yeah, but we see it all the time. And unfortunately, the thing that bothers me about that is there's never any follow-up, to charge them in addition. They should be charged for
statements that were
making false statements.
Yeah. So in the event, if we have a listener or someone that they know, may have been impacted or something like this, the listeria or these recalls that result in serious injury or death, do you have any advice or steps that people can take to kind of preserve some of that evidence if it looks like that's the cause of their injury?
Yeah, certainly what you talked about is, you can only do a limited amount of things, right, as the actual consumer. But number one, as you talked about, to the extent that you've got the receipt, absolutely hold on to that. If you've got the actual packaging, of course, that's absolutely critical. And then from there, it kind of goes out to things that are kind of beyond your control. But you gotta get a professional, an attorney involved in it quickly, so they can make moves to try to get what evidence might still exist on the premises of the defendant.
That is the key.
And that's just so to me, first thing you got to do is seek help from someone that does this all the time.
Yeah, absolutely right. And that's exactly what we're here for, folks. So anything that you're hearing, if you have questions about or it sounds familiar to someone that you should certainly call professionals like ourselves. That's what we do day in and day out at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. And so if you have any questions about a situation now that you'd like to talk to us about, feel free to give us a call here at the station at 727-441-3000. The lines are open. We're happy to take those questions or calls. But of course, if you have a case that you'd like to be reviewed and consult about, of course, you can always give us a call at the office, which is 727-796-8282. That's the best way to reach us after this show is over. You can also find us online at usalaw.com. Now, it's a great time to take a short break, just to go to a bit of a commercial. And then we'll come back. We've got a couple more stories and lawsuits that are in the news, some of them very big. One that actually resulted in a Netflix series all about that particular case. So we'll come back. We are live here in the studio, FLA Law, live on the radio. We'll be back after this short break.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
After a car accident, there are many questions that you need answers to. Who pays for my car repairs? Who pays for the medical bills? What about my lost wages? And more. The personal injury law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes has been answering these questions for their clients for nearly 70 years. Since 1955, they've been a voice of the injured in the legal system. As one of the longest established law firms in Tampa Bay, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes is here to answer your questions. Listen to their live call-in radio show on this channel every Tuesday evening from 5 to 6 p.m. or call them at 727-796-8282 or visit them at voiceoftheinjured.com. Offices Clearwater, non-attorney spokesperson.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
And we are back with FLA Law live on the radio. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you've been listening since 5. If not, thank you for joining us. Again, call your mom, your brother, tell everybody. The legal call-in talk show is live on the air right now. You've got about another half hour, a little less, to get your questions in, and we want to hear from you. So again, the number is 727-441-3000. We are streaming. I see we've got a couple viewers online. Thanks for watching. Share and hit the button. The more people that see it, the better they'll have an opportunity to ask their question on the radio. So before we left for the break, we were just going over a couple different lawsuits and things that are in the news right now that are kind of in our sector. Some of them we'll get to in a second that may be a little bit outside of it. But with that being said, I saw one just a couple days ago as a lawsuit out of Polk County that I thought was quite interesting. So I'll give you the rundown and read kind of the summary of it so you know what happened, and then we can get your take on it, Brian. This is a gentleman who was actually shot in the course of a police chase in 2022. And so he was actually shot by the police. And he's claiming that he nearly died in a Polk County jail. So it didn't die, but nearly died due to being refused medical care for this gunshot wound. And essentially what happened after he was arrested, he was taken in complaining of pain. They basically gave him some ibuprofen and put him in isolation. He later ended up being restrained in the infirmary, and he made multiple complaints when he went in for his first appearance to the judge. He said, "Judge, they're not giving me any medical care. I'm in a lot of pain." Judge said, "I'm sure they'll take care of you when you get back to the jail," but that didn't happen. Essentially, he actually filed some sort of a grievance within the jail. They retaliated and put him in isolation because of that. He said that let's see here. He brought the lawsuit himself initially, that he asked the court to appoint attorneys. And so he's been appointed attorneys, Heather Lee and Jason Mehta of Foley and the Lardner Law Firm, to represent him. And essentially they're arguing that those that are incarcerated, we as a society expect prison custodians to provide adequate medical needs for those that are incarcerated, and that did not occur. Polk County Sheriff issued a statement that basically just highlighted his criminal history and said that he has a history of violent behavior. He was shot because of his violent behavior. He's received free medical care at taxpayers' expense, and now has filed a frivolous lawsuit complaining about the medical care that he received. It essentially took him about a month before he was finally treated. He still had the bullet bullet lodged in his knee, and it became infected. And there was actually a part that I saw. It said that one of the deputies sprayed some sort of unknown disinfectant on it. He doesn't even know what it was. It was brown and had a strong odor. Many of the inmates were complaining about his condition and the smell. He ended up developing an infection that caused bilateral edema to the point that he was completely immobile. And essentially, he went back to the judge, and the judge ordered that he be, taken to the hospital, where they found that he had a blood infection that had spread to his heart. They did perform emergency surgery to remove the bullet. Ultimately, though, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. I assume he still remains there. They said that there's been another Polk County Jail lawsuit like this in 2015, very similar to Mr. Ricky Lee Christmas, who had the same type of allegations, took it to a trial in 2021, and he won $400,000 in damages. What do you think?
I think it's a case because I've handled the case for someone that was incarcerated for a DUI, and unfortunately he died.
Wow.
During the first night he was there in prison, and it was a really sad, heartbreaking case. And again, one of the things that made the case for us was the jail's own surveillance video. When he came in,
that's the theme for this evening.
Yeah, I mean, he came in, and unfortunately, he was a gentleman who, in the past, had abused alcohol. He had all the telltale signs of, kind of complete liver failure. Getting very jaundiced, getting very confused as, ammonia builds up in your brain, affects your ability to think. And by the time they put him into isolation, it was really kind of heartbreaking to watch, because the man was just in his 40s and had children at home and a wife at home. And unfortunately, he did, commit a traffic infraction and get pulled over.
Right.
But it was really sad to watch. He was like loaded like a sack of potatoes onto the bunk. And then there was supposed to be someone that was checking on him every 15 minutes, and that didn't occur either. So a lot had to go wrong.
Right.
And a lot did. And interestingly enough, the way that jail was providing medical services was not with a doctor, but they had a doctor on call who was in another county hundreds of miles away here in Florida.
Oh, wow.
And he was here on a special program where you're licensed as a doctor in another country, and you can come in and get a special license to provide medical care to prisoners, which I had no idea about. But,
right.
The fundamental thing is what you talked about. You've got a right to adequate medical care, regardless of whether or not, you've committed a crime.
Right.
That's just the fundamental constitutional right that the federal courts have said inmates have. And so you've got a number of cases there, a number of causes of action. You've got constitutional, federal type causes of action, denial of, your rights. And then in addition to that, you've got, medical malpractice type remedies. And who the defendants are, it's not just necessarily who you think it is, because it could be a private company. That
he is suing one private company.
Yeah, there's usually there's a company that provides services under contract to the jail.
It's called Yes Care. He's suing Yes Care and a couple of the deputies and one of the nurses.
Yep. So that's a complicated case, and but clearly it sounds as though there is a case. The question's going to be about, well, what kind of damages were caused by the negligence?
Yeah.
Would he have gotten a blood infection anyway from the presence of the bullet? Those are the kinds of things, which is why sometimes you get that kind of an argument. Hey, he's a bad guy anyway. So
yeah.
I
was going to ask you about that. What do you think about their statement about?
Well, I mean, look, that's
who he is.
That's they're hoping that will kind of taint a jury against them, where the jury will say, "Hey, man, you got what you deserved." In a sense, it's almost like trying to promote jury nullification. Yes, there's a case, but here's $1 for damages. So, obviously the lawyers will have to, we'll have to deal with that, as the arguments are being made and motion and limines to keep out those types of comments, because that's not the question. The question is whether or not he was provided adequate medical care. Not the best medical care in the world, just adequate medical care.
Right. And I did skip over some of those facts because they did spend some time talking about that. And I think I'd agree with you. As his lawyer, we'd be fighting really hard to keep out a lot of those facts. But apparently there was a police chase, and he actually drove his car towards the officer as to kind of run into the officer. That's how he ended up getting shot. So those facts aren't the best for him. But if they can keep that out, then I think, like you said, it seems like a pretty strong case. Now, but on the other hand, and I could be wrong, because I have not actually handled a case like that before, but isn't there some sort of lien for the time that inmate is being incarcerated? Obviously, you're paying almost essentially, taxpayers are paying for essentially his room and board, if you will. And I feel like I remember hearing about some sort of lien that they can put for that time for that inmate against the case or whatever award that you get.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah.
It wasn't tried in my case, but there certainly could be some law that says you have to pay back the reasonable cost of your care, but I would tend to doubt that.
Okay. That's interesting. I have to look into that, but that's obviously something that would certainly deter people if that were the case of taking these kinds of lawsuits. But so we'll see how that plays out. I'm glad he's not pro se anymore. It sounds like he has good, capable counsel now. He did originally sue Grady Judd as well, but he ended up being dropped as a defendant. But that statement that got put out sounded very Grady Judd-like.
Yes, it did.
If you're familiar with the kind of statements that he makes.
I am.
But yeah, so that obviously is an interesting case. And I saw another one that I thought a lot of people might know about. And the reason why it's coming back up in the news is because it's now up for appeal. It's before second DCA, I believe. But it is the Take Care of Maya case. And that was a pretty popular Netflix series that had followed the care in that case. A young girl who had been diagnosed with, I guess they call it RSV or CRPS. And she had been taking ketamine, and there was just a lot of things that went wrong with how she was treated when she was at Johns Hopkins, and she ended up being basically held there, and her parents didn't have access to her, really couldn't even talk to her, I think, at times, where mom couldn't even get her on the phone and speak to her own daughter. And through the course of that, because of the Child Protective Services type case that came about, the mom had gone through such great grief, and at least the family alleged that whole process and the way that she was treated ultimately led to the mother committing suicide. And the family sued the hospital for claiming that their actions was what led to that. And they did get an award, I think, at around the end of 2023 for $220 million. I think ultimately it was reduced down to about 208 or 202, but it's still a $200 million verdict. And so now, of course, it is being appealed, and Johns Hopkins has taken the position that they feel that the jury just got it completely wrong. And so without going over the whole entire article, I'll look at this, the main part about the appeal, which basically says attorney Derek Stilkleather argued that the hospital did not get a fair trial, saying it should not be held liable for the suicide of a non-patient 3 months after she had last been at the hospital. Stilkleather also pushed back against the Kowalski family's claims of insurance fraud, then argued that the trial court profoundly misconstrued immunity protections when reporting possible child abuse. And these three major errors set the stage for wild allegations that this is a hospital that kidnapped and tortured a little girl in order to kill her mother, Stilkleather said. Attorney Mike Tanner argued on behalf of the Kowalski family, saying that the hospital is misinterpreting the scope of the immunity when suspected child abuse is reported. And also fought back against the allegations that the hospital claims that the Department of Children and Families tightly controlled everything Maya could and couldn't do during her time there. And so he basically said that that's a significant exaggeration to say that DCF was involved in the details of what Maya could do, scheduling phone calls, whether she kept her bathroom door open. That was all done by the hospital, Tanner says. So essentially, it looks like the second DCA Court of Appeals is expected to rule on the hospital's appeal at a later date. So we don't know exactly when that is going to happen, but the oral arguments have now occurred. So we were talking a little bit about the immunity off the air. And obviously, I'm not entirely well versed on that. But what are your thoughts on this appeal, this huge verdict, and where you think it may go as my legal analyst?
Well, I mean, certainly a super interesting case.
It is.
And I don't claim to know, like I haven't studied all the causes of action and all the, the arguments that went on to let evidence in or keep evidence out. But certainly the one that probably is the most interesting that I'm hearing about is this concept of immunity. That is that there's a duty imposed upon healthcare providers to report suspected abuse. And so usually when there is that obligation, there's usually kind of a reciprocal privilege that you can't therefore get in trouble for reporting that unless it's totally done in bad faith. And so that's a high standard. But obviously the jury found that they didn't meet that. The other thing I find interesting is that you said it was about a $220 million verdict. The trial judge would have had an opportunity after the verdict to look over all these same arguments, and the judge didn't buy them and only reduced the verdict from, you said 220 down to 200.
Right.
So, that kind of bodes well in the plaintiff's favor. But if you're reading some of these reports, on jury verdicts, I saw one up in the Gainesville area where a young man was paralyzed in a truck accident, and there was a verdict there that was it was like 100 and some million. This young man was like 21. He's a paraplegic, and the trial court, after the verdict, reduced 120 to like 12 million.
Oh, wow. That was a big hit.
I mean, just an amazing thing, and said something to the effect, well, he's doing really well right now. He's got a girlfriend, and he's going to electrician school.
Oh, my goodness.
And just so it's so very difficult to predict, individual. It's hard to compare,
right?
The two cases. So it'll be very interesting to me, but if I'm a betting man, I'm betting that case is going to be reversed.
Yeah, and I know you've obviously had your wounds with the second DCA, and you have your feelings and thoughts about that. And so, based on the appellate court that we have, that's your feeling that it's probably not going to stand, right?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be very interesting. I'll certainly, and now that you'd mentioned that that's actually been argued, I believe that folks are going to be able to go on to the Second District Court of Appeal website and watch the
arguments. Yeah,
so I think that would be a fascinating lesson in justice, because you're going to have some of the best lawyers in the state arguing that, you can be assured.
Yeah.
And so it'll be very interesting to see. And all you can say is that you hope justice prevails.
Right. So it sounds like they were trying to kind of point the finger a little bit at DCF and the Kowalski family's attorney, saying, no, this was all John Hopkins. So, yeah. Interesting. We'll see how that does play out. But I just remember I saw the Netflix documentary, and I thought it was a very, very difficult case. So I was surprised to see the verdict was so huge. But I've had clients of my own who have those same diagnoses, and were also treating with ketamine with some of the same doctors that were treating Maya. So it was pretty compelling to me. That obviously sparked my interest, because it's all local here. So with that being said, our last one is just kind of a fun one, interesting one. Doesn't have much to do with personal injury, but it's local because it's the Bucks. And I didn't know if you had heard about it, but our very own quarterback, Baker Mayfield, had filed a $12 million lawsuit against his father's company, alleging that essentially he transferred over $12 million without his authorization to some sort of a financial firm that his father owns, it seems like. And Baker Mayfield, who's 29 years old, had no knowledge of the transfer and didn't know what was going on with it. And when he confronted the company about this transfer and what was happening with it, essentially they came up with some sort of invented explanations that I guess they described as fictional in terms of what they actually did with the money. And it looks like the lawsuit is still pending, and that when they reached out to his father's company for a comment as to what happened to the funds and where they were being funneled. Of course, he did not give any comment as to that. Had you heard about that?
I did hear about it. It's kind of heartbreaking to hear when you have a son suing a father, but
I did not.
you also have a question, even if, the father's found to have done something wrong, that doesn't mean there's going to be any money there to get back. It could have been lost. So, it seems certainly like, a heartbreaking case of how sometimes money creates problems.
Yeah. The actual financial company or which bank? Yeah. The ones that's doing the wires, huh? I don't know. That's a good question.
Well, it'll be interesting to see that if he
what are the checks and balances of the authorization?
Yeah, I mean, certainly when he signed up with his dad to have his dad manage the money, I'm sure there were a lot of documents,
papers that were signed,
giving probably some authorization to get into the account to move money, and so that's why you got to trust the people who are handling your money. That's for sure. And honestly, you got to put that money in with an appropriately large size entity so that if problems ever occur, there'll be financial responsibility behind it,
right?
Such as insurance policies and things like that.
Exactly right.
Because if this is his dad that decided to, just go out and be his own company, there might not be that particular level of financial security. And even if the lawsuit went the distance and you got a judgment, that doesn't automatically mean you can collect it.
Right. And that's what I was thinking. I'm wondering if there's insurance behind all this, if that's going to maybe be what makes him whole, if anything. But to go back to your question, Ed, it did say that there was no proper documentation that they could find or adequate accounting of some of the transactions. So there is this subsidiary that I guess was looking into it. So I don't know if his father's company is the only defendant. There may be other defendants that he sued because of, again, him not having any idea as to what was going on with that money. So that's quite interesting. And that wasn't that long ago. It looks like he just filed it maybe a couple months ago. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And again, that is quite sad to hear about that lawsuit because I hadn't heard about it actually. But that being said, we have just a few short minutes left. We, of course, are here to answer your questions. If you call, you have to get it in very quickly. The number is 727-441-3000. We are still live on Facebook and Facebook and YouTube for the last couple minutes. But of course, I want to make sure that everyone knows, again, we're celebrating our 70th anniversary. If you have been a client of ours, of course, we sincerely appreciate your business and trusting us with your personal injury matters. That is something that we enjoy doing. We spend our life doing. So we thank you for that. We have gone over quite a lot of topics tonight. There is, of course, always the general topic that I always default back to whenever I can, if I can close out a show. Folks, always, always, always check your insurance policies. Make sure you have uninsured motorist coverage. If there's ever one piece of advice that I can always leave with you at the end of every show, I don't always get to say it, but when I do and I can, there's an opportunity. I tell you, you got to have UM. Sadly, there's so many instances and just recent case that came through my door a very badly injured pedestrian. And right now, we don't know if there's going to be coverage. The driver kind of hit and run, left the scene, was in a rental car, and person may not have coverage. So those are the sad stories. Those are the ones that we never, want to hear or see. And so check your policies. If you have the apps on your phone for your car insurance, look to see if you're carrying it. If you're not at it, if you have an agent, call them up, talk to them about it. And that's something that you just want to be mindful of, because we do this day in and day out. And that's one of the most heartbreaking things that I see when we have these kinds of cases, when that coverage isn't there. Any advice when it comes to that, Brian?
Well, I think, as you said, the number one take-home message, if you remember nothing else about the show, buy uninsured motorist coverage. Mm-hmm. Chances are, if you or a loved one gets involved in an auto accident or is hit as a pedestrian or a bicyclist, the person that caused all the damage to you or your loved one will have little or no insurance. And when that happens, there's only one way to protect yourself. Yeah. That's if you bought uninsured motorist coverage. It clings to you, goes with you wherever you are, whether you're on your bike, whether you're in someone else's car, mm-hmm. and you get hit by someone with no coverage or only a $10,000 policy, right, and they've cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. Unfortunately, you'd like to think there's a debtor's prison and they're going to have to pay your medical bill, or they don't get out of prison until they do. Yeah. It's actually not like that, even a little bit.
Not at all.
They, unfortunately, the best defense for them is not having any money. And so they essentially can be irresponsible, cause an accident. In many cases, you're not going to get anything from them because they have no assets, they have no insurance.
Right.
And just because you're severely injured, like you said, Jacqueline, I've been in very many conferences where you're trying to explain to an angry family how it could be that you've been caused to incur all of these bills, and it doesn't appear as though there's any financial responsibility that's going to be able to come in and properly compensate you. So you got to take matters into your own hands and protect yourself and your family members from those people out there on the road. And the way you do that is what we call mm-hmm. uninsured motorist coverage protection, when the other driver is uninsured or when they are underinsured, meaning they don't have enough money to fully pay for your damages. If you have not bought uninsured motorist coverage on your auto policy, you've committed the biggest auto insurance mistake possible.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. If you have questions about that, I know we were kind of mentioning that here at the tail end of the show. So if that is something that you have more questions about and you're not able to get your question in tonight, that's okay. You can give us a call at the office. We're more than happy to take a look at your policy, answer your questions about coverage. It's vitally important that you have it. So I'm going to give you the office number just in case you didn't hear it earlier. Do not call the radio station after 5 because we'll be gone. The number to the office will be 796-8282. That's how you reach us and find us. Again, we are the personal injury attorneys at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. This has been our legal call-in talk show, FLA Law, live on the radio. Thank you, folks, for joining us. As always, we will see you next Tuesday at 5 p.m. on FLA Law on the radio. Good night.